Hi class, in this chapter, in this video, we're going to cover chapter 19 of the textbook. So this is the first part of the class where we're going to the bigger pictures here. So from this point on, every chapter after this will be dealing with a bigger picture. So something affecting the entire economy, okay? So first, let's look at some definitions we learned before. So difference between macroeconomics and microeconomics. So micro is economy on a smaller scale. So, let me turn on my pen. This happens all the time now. Normally it's default, but all right, here we go. Okay, so microeconomics, well, it's on a smaller scale. So information affecting individual firms, individual consumers, how business behave in different market structures. So that's micros on a smaller scale. Now, from this point on, I'm going to focus on macroeconomics. So, so economy on the bigger pictures. Some information affecting entire economy, so such as inflation, unemployment, economic growth affecting entire economy. That's all part of this macroeconomics. And then the first term you're going to learn in this part of the chapter is something called a GDP. So GDP, you guys all heard this before. So GDP roughly, it will show you just how wealthy the country is. So GDP actually doesn't measure how much money the country has. It measures how much good and service country can produce. So this GDP stands for gross domestic product. So domestically, so in the country, how much stuff you can produce. Now there's one more term you guys might come see it later. It's called GNP. Now GNP stands for gross national product. So that measures everything produced by the home economy, regardless where the good is produced. So the difference between GNP and GDP is that GDP is everything produced in the country, regardless who produced it. GNP is everything produced by the home economy. So let's suppose if Ford, which is a US company, so if Ford make a car in Mexico, that will be Mexico's GDP because it's in Mexico. But because the car is made by US company, that's US GNP. Okay, so again, remember, GDP is everything produced in the country, regardless who produced it. GNP is everything produced by the home economy, regardless where the good is produced. Okay, so there's a difference. So first, let's look at GDP. So the formal definition for GDP is the market value of all final goods and services produced in the country with a specific period of time. So this, even though it's only one sentence, but this has a lot of information in it. Okay, so let's break it down. Okay, so GDP also equals to your total income, because for everything we produce in the economy, they will be paid for. They will be compensated. So for whatever we produce, we're going to pay for that, and that will also equal to our national income. So roughly speaking, the GDP also equals to your G and I. Now, again, this is roughly speaking. There are other small details involved, but for now, I'm going to ignore that. So roughly speaking, GDP equals to G and I. Okay, so gross national income. All right, so why is GDP important? Now, GDP, we use that to see how much is standard living for the country. So if the country is wealthy or not, that can be indicated by GDP. And then we can also look at if the economy is growing, so economic growth. Because GDP is like you're taking a temperature check. Then you want to see how good the economy is, we look at our GDP. So if GDP is increasing, then we're producing more stuff than before, then the economy is growing. Now, however, if GDP is decreasing, then we've got a problem. Okay, and then which means we're using GDP to see these short-term fluctuations in the economy. So even between if it's expansion, so the economy is getting better, or if it's recession, when it means the economy is getting worse. And guys also know the difference between recession and depression. Okay, so in recession is anytime you have 2 quarters. So for 6 months, our GDP goes down, 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 down. That's a recession. Now depression is when you have 4 quarters. So for the entire year, our GDP goes down, 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 down. That will be called depression. Now, so far we have only one depression. That's a Great Depression, but recession is very common. So we have a recession every 5 to 7 years. Okay, and last one was 2008. So we're a little overdue for another recession. All right, so if you look at the total GDP for the countries, let me show you a chart, okay? Here we go. So this is number for 2013. So it's a little outdated, but it still shows you roughly the same ranking. So back in 2013, US we were number one in GDP. Today, US number two, China is number one now. Okay, but even though today China produce more goods and services than US, it doesn't mean that China is a wealthy country. The problem is that just China has too many people. So for all the stuff they produce in the country, for all the national income they have, they must share that with 1.4 billion people. But in America, we have a much smaller number of population. So when we produce a slightly less total GDP, but we're sharing with a way less amount of people. So one thing we need to know is what is this thing called a per capita GDP or per person GDP. So if you know your per person GDP, that's what shows you what is the standard living for the country. So if the country is wealthy or not. So for example, in our example here, we listed between Germany and China. Now China's GDP back in 2013 is almost like tripled compared to Germany's. But because China has so many people, the per person GDP was only about $6,800, but Germany was $46,000. Huge difference, right? So when you look at how poor, how rich a country is, don't look at just how much total production they have. Also look at how much is the per capita production or per capita GDP. So this will show you what is the average standard living. Okay. And then, guys, the keyword here is average. And sometimes this average can be very misleading. That just because your average is high doesn't mean the country is really rich. So let's suppose this. Let's suppose for a country there are only 3 people, and then one person is making $1 million. One person is making, let's say, 10,000, and another person also making 10,000. And then if you're looking for the per personal GDP or per personal income here, each person will be making at least what $30,000 roughly, right? But it doesn't mean everybody's making that much money. It's because one person on top making so much that's increasing the average for everybody down there. Okay, all right. This is our U.S. Per personal GDP, so per capita GDP. So for the last 50 some years, you can see this clear trend that the per capita GDP is increasing. Now, however, you do see a little fluctuations here and there, right? So you see how this is increasing, right? And then you have a little decreasing over here, increasing again, and a huge decrease over here, and an increase again. So the long-term trend is the economy is improving, but the short-term trend is that we still have increase, decrease here and there. And then this huge increase you see, that's roughly about 2007 to 2010. That's our last recession. The last recession was so severe, it was called the Great Recession. Okay, like your Great Depression. All right. So now what's a business cycle? So business cycle is this short-term fluctuation of our GDP around this long-term trend. So when you saw that our US GDP per capita was increasing, right, but it's fluctuating along the long-term trend, that is called a business cycle. So it's all natural. It goes up and down, up and down, up and down. Now, for our business cycle, there are 4 parts. You have expansion, and then peak, contraction, and then trough. So anytime economy is increasing or GDP is increasing, that's expansion. Anytime you reach the highest point, that's your peak. And when it's turning down, that's contraction. And at the lowest point, right before it goes up again, that's your trough. So this is very natural. So this happens all the time, okay? So one more clear look. So at the highest point is peak, lowest point is trough, going down contraction, and then going up expansion. Now this contraction is also your recession, your depression. Okay, so that's when the economy is going down. Okay, but it's in the long trend. The long term looks like economy overall is it's improving. What is so this huge decrease here? That was our Great Recession. So back in 2008. Right. So the first that part of the definition for GDP is this market value. So why is that important? Now, suppose you have an economy that produce 12 billion bushel of corn and 8 million cars. Now, if you just go by the numbers, go by the quantity, looks like we produce way more number of corns, right? So that's a good thing. But if you compare how many cars we're producing, that 12 billion bushel of corn is not a big deal anymore because your 8 million cars are so much more valuable. That's why if you look at GDPs, or look at the market value of everything you're producing, not just the quantity, because the quantity doesn't do you the justice. Because quantity sometimes you have a higher number, but they're worthless. So what is 100 times point 0.1, right? It's almost nothing. So that's why we don't care. I mean, the quantity is not that important. What's important is this thing called market value. So it's your quantity times price, and that is your market value. Okay. Now, again, imagine, let's suppose last year, China produced, let's say, 100 million shirts, and then U.S. only produced, like say, 10 airplanes. Now, which one's better? Well, if you see how much a shirt is and how much an airplane is, and then you know for sure which one's better. And then if you guys are interested, just Google this. Google how much it costs you to buy a Boeing 747. Okay, I'm telling you, that one airplane can buy you at least I want to say 30 million t-shirt. Okay, so it's very expensive. All right, so market value. To find the market value, again, we're using the quantity times prices. That's your market value. And then to find the total market value, once you find the value for corn plus the value for cars, and that'll give you the total market value. All right, so GDP not just including how much good you're producing, GDP is also including how much service you're producing. So right now for US, we're the number 2 economy in the world. We produce second most goods and services. Now it doesn't feel like that because we don't produce that much stuff here anymore. I mean, sure, we produce the airplanes, we produce the cars, some of the cars, but a lot of stuff we have in the economy today are all produced somewhere overseas. Think about all the stuff you have, all the shirts you have, all the electronics you have, all the computers you have. They're made somewhere else outside of America, right? So we don't make that much stuff anymore. So why is our GDP still so high? It's because the service component. There's still a huge part of the economy. That even though our good production is decreasing, but our service production has been increasing for the last 50 years. So if you look at this share over here, that about the 1950s, only about 40% of the economy is in the service industry. But today, over 65% of the economy. Oh man, this is a huge typo. Guys, ignore. Okay, so this over here should be a 0.75. Don't forget about percentage. Okay, if you do percentage, this is a basic math problem. Somebody made a mistake on the PowerPoint. If you do percentage, this is not a 0.75%. This should be a 65%. Okay, all right. So right now, the service component in the economy is accounting for over 65% of the economy. So most of the economy in the US is coming from service component. So anything from your lawyers, your doctors, your psychiatrists, your tailors, those are all providing a service for us. Okay, and that's a huge part of the economy, and that's the reason why US we're number 2 economy in the world. Now, the other part of GDP says it measures all the final good and service. Now, to be final, it means that this good must be ready to be consumed by the end user, the last user. So a good way to think about this is that anytime you have something that's purchased by a consumer for their personal use, that's a final good. Because for this consumer, they are not going to resell this anymore. But if this good is purchased by a business and they will use this to make some other good, then they will be called an intermediate good. So for intermediate good, they are not part of our GDP. And the reason why is that if you account all the intermediate good in the economy, you might be more than likely to double count how much economy is. So for this intermediate good, let me give another example, right? So let's suppose we take a piece of paper. Now, is that a final good or intermediate good? Now, it depends on who buy it. If you guys buy it as a student, you're going to use it to take notes. That's a final good, because once you use it, nobody else can use them anymore. But if you have a company, let's say a book publisher, they will buy the paper and then turn it into a book, and then that paper will become an intermediate good in that process, because the final good is the book, right? So think about this. So remember, if a company buy this, that will be intermediate good. But if a consumer buy this and for personal uses, that's a final good. Okay. All right, so another example here. So imagine that if we're counting our final good, and you're counting this Intel chip as final good, and this chip will be later put in the phone, and then you're counting the phone as final good again, then this chip will be counted twice. So one time by itself, and then second time inside the phone, and that will be double counting economy. So that's why we're going to avoid that. So we don't count anything that's not finished for consumers yet. So this process, when it's just a chip, when it's purchased by companies, we don't count that. We only count it when it's been produced as a final product that's inside the iPhone. Okay. And also, we're going to avoid any type of resale of used good, because again, that would double count the economy as well. So imagine we have a person who bought a car uh, in 2014, and then this car is sold again in 2016. Now, should we count the car again in 2016 as our GDP? We shouldn't, right? Because that car is not produced in 2014. And then also, if you do, you'll be double counting the economy. Okay, so to avoid double counting, we're going to count only the final good and only when it's being produced, not when it's being sold or resold again. Okay. All right. So for our GDP, there are four components. You have consumption, investment, government spending, and net export. Now, Y stand for this is many things. So Y is your GDP, is your output. This is also your income. And remember that little equation we have right below the definition for GDP, that is what Y is. Okay, so consumption, investment, government purchase, and net export. Now, consumption. But also, guys, you might see questions like this on your test. Not as complex as this. That I will give you, let's say, four of the variables, and ask you to find out how much is the missing variable. Okay, so make sure you know this equation over here. That's very important. All right, so consumption. Consumption is everything purchased by the consumers for their household uses. But for consumption, there are different type of consumptions. There's a consumption for durable goods. That means consumer will use this good for a long period of time. So imagine like a car, like a TV. Those would be durable goods. And also including non-durable goods, there's stuff like your grocery store that you're gonna consume that over this very short period of time. Let's say milk or eggs; those are non-durable good. And then service, there's a service we're consuming. Okay, so again, teachers, lawyers, doctors; those are services. Investment have three components here. So investment, they're your capital purchase. That means company actually buying equipment, buying tools, buying cars and trucks, and buying buildings. And then next is changing business inventory. So let's suppose company decide to produce 100 iPhone this year, but we don't sell them this year. We're going to sell them next year in 2019. Now that will increase our 2019 sales number, right? So even though this is just a carryover of inventory to next year, but that's actually part of the investment. But this inventory carry over to next year will increase our business in the future. Now, last one is any type of new residential housing. So when homeowner buys a new house, this is also part of the investment. Okay, and the reason why, because as most of the purchase we make, we use them, and then after a certain amount of time, once it's depleted, with no more useful life, the good is gone. You cannot resell this. So I mean, imagine you had a TV. Well, you know what? No, TV is not a good example. Imagine you have a old a PS1. You have a PS1. Okay, how much can you sell that for right now? Probably worthless. So that will be a consumption good. But for housing, many of our homeowners and also consumers and people in the economy will use housing as an investment. Then we buy the house. We don't intend to use the house forever. We're going to leave the house for a couple of years, or 5, 7 years, and then sell for profit, right? So that's why housing is considered as an investment. Now, what's not included in here is the normal sense, the common sense of investment, such as stocks and bond, or what we know as an investment. The reason why this investment is not this investment does not include stock and bond is that this stock and bond, they're financial investment. They're a representation of an ownership of a company. That when there's a transaction of stocks, there is no real good that's taking place. That all it happened is that we purchased the part of a company, but there's no real good that's being produced in this process. So that's why any type of stock investment or bond investment, even though we call them investment for personal investments, but they are not investment as part of GDP, because in their transactions, there's no production of goods and services. Okay. All right. Now next, government purchase. So this is whenever government is buying any goods and services in the economy, and this is including all level government. So federal, state, local. Whenever they buy something, so when they hire employees, when they buy a postal service trucks, those will be called a government purchase. However, government purchase does not include something called a transfer payment. Now, transfer payment, these are the free benefit given to recipients. And for those people who receive the benefit, we're asking for nothing in return. Now, imagine this. Imagine that our government is hiring an employee in RS, so tax revenue service. And then we also have let's say retired people. Are they called retired people? Social Security. Okay, so Social Security benefit. Now, for RS, the government's getting a service in return. That this employee will be providing a service for the government. But for Social Security, the recipients for them, they don't do anything in return. They don't have to. You don't see people, old people holding a sign on the highway that says government is good just because you're getting money from government, right? So because those money are free money, there's no string attached. The government is not receiving anything in return. So therefore, they're called transfer payment. And transfer payment is not part of our GDP. All right, and last one is called net export. Net export is your export minus import. So for all the previous variables, your consumption, your investment, your government purchase, those are always positive. Now, however, for net export, this can be negative because you're going to have this export minus import. And then for U.S. economy, our net export is positive. I mean, is negative. Okay, but if you look at China, China actually have a positive net export. Vietnam has a positive net export. So it depends on different country. It depends on the structure of the economy. That's why this can be positive or negative. Okay. Now, when you have a negative net export, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing, because there's so much different calculation involved in the GDPs. That just because your net export is negative, it doesn't mean a bad thing. Now, for example, if you look at the iPhone, now iPhone will be considered as a Chinese production because it's made in China, but China doesn't produce all the components in iPhone. That China only assemble iPhone. So if you look at the total value of the iPhone, China only contribute to about 6% of total value. The other 94% coming from other economies. But because how this GDP is calculated, that China was the last step to assemble all the parts in the iPhone, that this total value of iPhone is now being attributed to the Chinese economy. Now, even though it will increase the net export number, but it doesn't do any good for the economy. Okay. So, and then another thing about trade, we're gonna learn this in the later chapters. Don't always think that export is good and import is bad. Now, import is good. And guys, I'm telling you, import is very, very good. Because when we're importing from other countries, that means we have other countries' people working for us, make our stuff. and that is good. Okay, so more import doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It actually means a good thing for the economy, because we have more, we have other people from other countries service us, making t-shirt for us, making computers for us, and then maybe even cooking for us. So all the other service provided by other countries for us, then we are better off. Okay. All right, so next, know that what is called a nominal GDP and a real GDP. So nominal GDP is your GDP measured in the current year prices. Now remember this first part we talk about the price times quantity, right? So nominal GDP is measured in the current year prices. So whatever is the price now times whatever is the quantity now, that will be your nominal GDP. Now, however, nominal GDP is not a very accurate way to see how good the economy is. Because remember, for any economy, we don't care about how much money you have. We care about how much good and service you can produce. So this quantity here, that's what's really important for the economy. Now, however, imagine that for next year, so for next year, that our nominal GDP, that this, so call this one n+1, is increasing. So price increased, but our quantity stay the same, still same quantity. Now, in that case, your nominal GDP will be increased because P+1 is higher. So whenever you have a price change will affect how much your nominal GDP is, and that can be very misleading. That can be showing a wrong message how good the economy is. So we need to isolate the price effect on this GDP over here. And this term is called a real GDP. So real GDP, we're going to use the base year price times current year quantity. So we're going to choose a base year. That this can be like 2 years ago or 5 years ago. And then using that base year price multiplied by the current year quantities, and that will give you how much a real GDP is. Now, in this chapter, we'll have a much simpler form. This form will be involving price level to find nominal or real GDP. So price level, think this as the overall average prices of everything in the economy. That's your price level. Okay, so in the previous chapter, we learned what's the price. Price is how much you pay for one good. Okay, a price level, this is for all good. All right, so let me show you the formula. This is the formula. So your nominal GDP equals to your real GDP is equal to your nominal GDP divided by price level times 100. So this is just a simple formula. You plug in numbers, and that will show you how much your real GDP is. And if you flip it, if you do the real GDP times the price level equals to nominal GDP. Okay. Oh, don't forget divided by 100. So either way you work out around, you can find out how much your real GDP is and how much your nominal GDP is. And let's skip that, talk about this already. Also known as the growth rate. We're going to use this in your inflation calculation and also use this in your GDP calculation to see how much the economy has been growing. So the growth rate, so you have this very complex formula. It says, so percentage change. By the way, the triangle is called delta. It stands for change. So percentage change equals to value t minus value t minus 1 over value t minus 1 times 100. Now, t means time now. T minus 1 means last time, okay? Another way, a simpler way to think about this is that your percentage change just equal to your new number minus the old number divided by old number times 100%. Okay, that's your percentage change. Okay, so don't think too much into it. Just new minus old divided by old. All right. Let's skip this. Just simple formulas, guys. Okay, so GDP is not perfect. The GDP doesn't measure all the problems in the economy or all the benefit in the economy. So for example, so here are some listed good that's not measured, non-market good, underground economy, environmental quality, and then leisure. Let's go over them. Okay, so first, non-market good. That some of the productions that's not included in the economy, but they're good for us. So, for example, if you decide to wash your car, do a car wash for your own car, now you don't pay yourself for it, right? So therefore, that's not part of GDP. But if you do this for somebody else, that will be part of GDP. Okay, so non-market activities is being ignored in this GDP calculation, and then because of this non-market activities, I can tell you this: that moms is the most underpaid profession in the economy. Think about this: how much do you pay your mom, right? I mean, sure, you pay your mom with love, that's worthless. But how much do you pay her money? Nothing, right? But what does she do? She cook, she clean, she's a part-time nurse, part-time psychiatrist, full-time chauffeur. So she does a lot of stuff for us, but we don't pay her any money for it. So that's a non-market activity. Okay, so that is not part of GDP. Okay. And the second, GDP doesn't measure the air quality or any type of environmental quality in the economy. That sometimes there's a huge trade-off between environment and GDP. Which one do you want to have more? Now, look at China or India. For those two countries, GDP has been growing tremendously in the last 40 years. Now, but what is also happening in those two countries is that the quality of environment has been going down in the economy tremendously in the last 40 years. So does it mean that this is good? The GDP increase is good? Well, you have to think about how much you're damaging your environment. That's a long-term effect. That's long-term impact, and those things won't come back anymore, right? So GDP is not a perfect picture. It shows you everything. So it wouldn't show you your environmental quality. Then next, GDP doesn't measure any type of underground economy. So this can be anything from legal to illegal. So illegal, you have your drugs, your prostitutions, because they don't report it, right? I mean, imagine that if you're the government of Colombia, you want to find out how much your GDP is, right? And you want to include your drugs over here. So do you think that the government of Colombia can call each drug lord, ask them, hey, El Chapo, how much drug did you sell last year? They're not going to tell you. so that's not reported because of the underground economy. Now, there's also some legal part too. Many of the waiters, at the end of the shift, they have all those cash tips. They don't report it. That is part of the income, but they don't report it, right? And then if you hire a babysitter, they probably don't report the income too, right? So that's all, even though they're legal services, but they are not reporting their income. Therefore, that's also part of this underground economy, and that is not being measured by the economy, by the GDP. All right. And then next one is leisure. So leisure, this is just think leisure as the fun time. Okay. So something you have for yourself to make yourself happy. Now think about this average work week. In South Korea, 46 hours per week. Netherlands is only 28 hours per week. So in Netherlands, people are working much less hours per week. So which means they should be happier, right? So those people are better off. But however, in South Korea, people are working longer hours. So even though they might have a higher GDP, but the people might be worse off because they have to work longer hours. And by the way, the 36 hour for Japan, I don't believe that. You guys want to do a little research to see how many hours that is, but I don't believe 36 hours for Japan. Japan should be much higher. The working culture for Japan and South Korea are very similar. The people working their ass off. Okay, all right. But it does have some good. Well, how do I put this? If you want to see how good the economy is, how good the country is, don't just look at GDP. GDP is a one picture, but there are also other picture that can show you a different story. So look at the life expectancy, look at the education level, look at healthcare, look at crime rate, and those are all indications of how good the country is. Okay, all right, guys. So that's it for this chapter. Let's end it here. So have any question? Let me know. Now remember, don't panic. This is a lot of information in this chapter. If you have to, watch this video 3-4 times And then again, have any question, let me know. Okay. All right, guys. Good luck. See you later. Bye bye.